Hi again. Welcome back. I'm Juniper Quinn, and this is One Big Dark Room. In my first episode, I talked a little about love. I've always been a little obsessed with love, and not in a casual way. I've never been very casual about, well, anything. I love it in a full body, heart on fire, tattoo it on my skin kind of way. But actually, I have the words from Moulin Rouge. The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. On my body, forever. That's how serious I am about it. I've started to realize something. We don't just fall in love with the idea of love, we're trained to, especially as women. We learn about happy endings far before we're taught science, math, or writing. We're taught that love will save us, complete us, rescue us. That if we act like a princess, our prince will arrive on a white horse. Love isn't just encouraged, it's marketed to us as our greatest achievement. And that conditioning didn't come out of nowhere. It's generational. For the silent generation, our grandmothers and great-grandmothers, marriage was survival. It was expected. A woman's worth was measured by how well she could care for a home, a husband, and children. Then came the baby boomers. Love got romanticized. The idea of happily ever after really took hold. Marriage wasn't just about security anymore. It was about passion, about finding your soulmate. And women were still told, this is the goal. By the time Gen X came around, the cracks had started to show. Divorce rates were rising, and people began to question whether love really guaranteed happiness. Still, the message lingered, just find the right person, and it'll all work out. Then us, the millennials. We grew up watching all of this unfold, the fairy tale, the fallout, and many of us started to believe that maybe we needed to find ourselves before we found someone else. That maybe love wasn't the prize. Maybe it was just one part of the story, optional, and sometimes not even necessary. Then Gen Z. They're rewriting the whole script. Love on their own terms. Partnership only if it fits. And marriage, maybe, maybe not. So when I talk about being obsessed with love, I'm not just talking about me. I'm talking about generations of women being taught to believe that love is the thing that saves us. And if we don't find it or can't keep it, we've somehow failed. I don't believe that anymore. Not for myself, at least. And not for the people listening who are still trying to untangle their worth from someone else's willingness to love them. The narrative that we were supposed to wait for our prince never felt right to me. In my case, I didn't fall for the prince. I fell for the villain. I had a type, and Disney definitely didn't help. Aladdin was cute, but I wanted Jafar. Okay, don't judge me. I confessed to a friend that Jafar was my Disney crush. I had never told anyone that before. He hasn't stopped teasing me about it since. I can't blame him, though. It is kind of funny, and he is also an actual clown, and one of my favorite people. After Jafar, I grew up and moved on to Phantom of the Opera, and hoped Christine would pick the Phantom. The Phantom was dark, intense, dangerous, and completely devoted, willing to do anything for Christine. And that kind of all-consuming love and obsession was what I wanted. It was enchanting to me. I didn't see the red flags. I saw someone with a tragic backstory. I saw romance. I saw someone who would burn the world down just to be chosen. And deep down, I wanted to be chosen that badly. I wanted someone to need me like that, to fight for me, even if it cost everything. Of course, now I can see how dark that really is. But at the time, that kind of love felt powerful and passionate. It felt like the opposite of being ignored or abandoned. Then came Sex and the City when I was 17. I binge watched it in my room whenever I had the chance. It felt like confirmation. Like, see, even grown women fall for emotionally unavailable men and still get the fairy tale. But when I watch it now and when I look at Carrie and Big's relationship, I can identify that what they had wasn't healthy. Their dynamic was unstable, but we were told it was passion. He ghosted her, gaslit her, left her at the altar, and she kept going back. We were supposed to believe that this was what real love looked like: unpredictable, addictive, full of longing and mixed signals. That kind of love teaches you to crave validation instead of consistency, to confuse instability for passion, to believe that love is something you earn by staying through the worst parts of someone. And for a long time, I didn't see anything wrong with that. I just thought that's what love looked like. The theme was always that he'd pull away and she would chase. He'd come back and she'd take him in and try to pretend she wasn't worried about him leaving. It was a loop, a pattern, and I didn't recognize it back then, but it mirrored something that looks a lot like the cycle of abuse. Now, I'm not saying Big was abusive in the traditional sense, but there was emotional whiplash and inconsistency. The power imbalance was real. And when you grow up being taught that love is supposed to be dramatic and hard and full of longing, you don't question it. You chase it. You mistake those butterflies for excitement when really it's anxiety. Looking back, it's no surprise that I always went for the bad guy in movies. Jafar, Phantom of the Opera, they weren't just villains to me. They were misunderstood, dark, complicated, a little cruel, but full of potential. I wasn't into the polished prince. I was drawn to the one who needed saving, and that carried into real life. For a long time, I thought my love life was just messy because I liked complicated people. I told myself I had a thing for the guys that other people just didn't understand. It went deeper than that. I was actually in love with the potential I saw in them, not where they actually were. I wasn't just dating them, I was trying to save them. And I didn't fully understand that until I came across something about the savior complex. It explained how people who grow up in unpredictable environments where they had to take on adult roles early, manage other people's emotions, or create stability, often carry that into adulthood. We become fixers, not because we want the recognition, because we learned that being the one that holds everything together is what makes us safe. It's how we feel useful or valuable. I realized that I didn't just want to be loved. I wanted to earn it. I wanted to be the reason someone finally got their life together. I was attracted to people who needed help because helping gave me a sense of control and purpose. If I could fix them, maybe I could finally feel okay too. And there's where it gets even more complicated, because with the savior complex, the part of me that believed love meant fixing, that staying meant I was strong. It didn't just lead me to emotionally unavailable partners. It led me into psychologically abusive relationships. When you're constantly drawn to the villain, the moody, cold, hard to love type, and you also believe it's your job to save them, you create the perfect storm. And that's exactly what I did, over and over. It wasn't always obvious at first. There were no physical altercations, maybe a few screaming matches, but overall, psychological abuse is quiet. It's subtle. It's someone constantly making you question your worth or your memory, your perception. It's them slowly chipping away at your boundaries and your identity, disguised as love or passion or just how they are. And because I thought I could fix them, I stayed. I overlooked red flags. I excused manipulation as their trauma. I put their pain above my own. I ignored my needs and poured myself into theirs, believing if I could just be enough, things would get better. But that's not sustainable. A savior complex can make you feel responsible for someone else's healing, especially when they're hurting you. You lose yourself trying to rescue them, all while they keep rewriting the rules. It fosters codependency, where your whole identity becomes tied to being the one who endures, who holds it all together. And abusers, especially psychological ones, know how to spot that. They know how to use your empathy against you. They'll feed off your desire to help, to understand, or to make things work. And before you know it, you're not just tired, you're gone, unrecognizable even to yourself. That's why it's so important to talk about emotional and psychological abuse, because it doesn't leave physical signs, but it absolutely leaves scars. And it's also why I had to learn the hard way that saving someone can never come at the cost of losing yourself. Women are raised to be nurturing, selfless, and patient. We're taught that putting others first is valued, and setting boundaries makes us difficult. So when I stayed in relationships where people weren't getting better, I thought that's what being a good partner looked like. But really, the savior identity was just keeping me stuck. It gave me something to focus on so I didn't have to face my own issues. It made me feel like I was making progress, but it actually kept me from growing. And the more I lived in that role, the more I lost sight of myself. It showed up in my romantic relationships as an imbalance with a lot of dependency and resentment. Love becomes an obligation. Neither person gets to be their best selves. The savior complex doesn't just draw you to people who are hurting, it draws them to you too. Because when you're wired to fix, there are people who know exactly how to take advantage of that. I talked about this relationship in my first episode, but I want to revisit it here because now I understand it differently. He met me during one of the hardest times in my life. My golden retriever, my whole world, had just been diagnosed with cancer. If you've ever loved a dog like that, you know what I mean. She was my home, my comfort, my everything. We had weekly vet visits, blood work, chemo. I was physically exhausted and emotionally wrecked. Every single day felt like it could be her last, and I was holding it together by threads. That's when he showed up. I was barely holding it together. Grief had worn down every part of me. That was his in. Trauma bonding was his MO. He knew how to find women already broken down by loss, stress, or fear, and slip in as the one who understood, the one who could offer comfort until he started needing all of it back. And somehow, even in the middle of everything I was going through, he still managed to make himself the victim. Every conversation circled back to him, his problems. And I didn't leave because I thought he was hurting too. I thought I could help. I thought my loyalty meant something. But I learned that no matter what, I would never be able to save him. He fit perfectly into my type. I've always been into people who are a little odd or offbeat, quirky in a way that made them stand out. And sometimes that kind of attraction leads to great connection, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes quirky is just a softer word for emotionally unavailable or reckless or cruel. I found myself going after men who were cold to the world, but in my mind would be kind to me. I wanted them to decide that they would finally change, but only for me. I wanted to be the exception to the rule, the one who broke through, the one who was worth it. I thought that was love. I thought I could earn tenderness by staying loyal through the dysfunction. That if I stuck around long enough, held enough space, forgave enough, I'd finally get the version of them I knew they could be. But that's not how it works. And that's how I ended up in relationships where I wasn't being loved, I was being tested or worn down or erased. Letting go of that role has been something I've continued to work on because it's not just a habit, it becomes somewhat of an identity. It's how I've seen myself for most of my life. When I walk away from someone's potential now, it's hard for it to not feel like a failure, like I'm letting someone down or that I'm not being good. But I'm learning that I don't have to earn my worth through sacrifice, that I can support people without losing myself, that I don't need to be someone's savior to be loved. And most importantly, that I don't need to make someone better to deserve better. I deserve someone already working at being their best, not stuck in their potential. Through my rom-com education and believing that love was the greatest thing, at 30, I figured it was time to get married. I was already past the age of when most people got married around here. I didn't get married because I was madly in love, though I did love him. I got married because I thought that's what you do. You find someone nice, stable, interested, and you lock it in. That was the script I was handed, and I followed it. I want to be clear. My marriage wasn't abusive. He was a good person. We were just very different people with different needs and dreams. It didn't work out, but when it ended, it felt like I had failed at something I had spent my whole life preparing for. What I've learned, and am still learning, is every relationship doesn't have to have a happy ending. My marriage and divorce taught me things I would have never learned otherwise, and I am grateful for the experience with a kind person. Divorce is hard, even when it's mutual and when you agree on most of the terms. What's wild is how easy it is to get married, but how complicated it is to get unmarried. And beyond all the paperwork and logistics, there's this heavy feeling that follows you around. It's not just grief, it's shame. Like you failed at something public. Like everyone gets to witness the unraveling of what was supposed to be a forever. These days, my go-to breakup movie isn't some sappy romance. It's he's just not that into you. I appreciate it the most because it shows so many different examples of real-life relationships. The main character, Gigi, spends most of the movie believing that if a guy doesn't call, if he ghosts her, if he's inconsistent, that there's still hope. Maybe he's busy with work, playing hard to get, or is out of the country. But Alex, the guy who calls her out and ends up falling for her, tells her the truth. When someone is interested, they'll show you. No confusion, no guesswork. These days, they say, if he wanted to, he would. Gigi had to unlearn the idea that love is supposed to be confusing, that it's found in the mixed signals and the waiting and the wishful thinking. When I date these days, if I get mixed signals, I say to myself, he's just not that into you. Because I know that the person who is right for me will be intentional with their time. At the end of the movie, she says something that gets me every time. She says, maybe a happy ending doesn't include a guy. Maybe it's you, on your own, picking up the pieces and starting over, freeing yourself up for something better in the future. That line continues to be something I reread to myself when things get hard in the dating world. Maybe the greatest love story isn't about finding someone, but about finding yourself and finally loving yourself enough to stop settling. Every failed date, every red flag, every almost relationship that ended in disappointment, it's hard for it to not feel like rejection. Now I try to use it as a reminder. Each time someone showed me that they weren't willing or ready or right, I got the chance to show up for me, to pour back into my own life, to build something for myself instead of waiting for someone else to come in and save me. If the right person comes along, I'll be open, but I'm not waiting to create the life I want while waiting for someone who hasn't even arrived yet. Loving myself wasn't just an idea. It started becoming a practice, a daily choice, and after my divorce, that practice took on a new shape. I started seriously considering van life. The obsession started during COVID, like it did for many people. When the world shut down, it forced all of us to reevaluate what actually matters. For me, it stirred this craving for freedom, solitude, and something that felt like mine. Something I couldn't have done as easily while I was married. I didn't want to wait for a partner or permission or the perfect timing. I wanted to build a life that reflected who I was becoming, not just who I had been. So I picked up the idea again, post-divorce, but this time with intention. Not as an escape, as an experiment in self-trust. Of course, not everyone understood. People thought the idea was cool, adventurous, but when I started talking seriously about living in a van, suddenly it wasn't too inspiring. It was unrealistic or too risky or not safe. If you know me, you know I love a good challenge. I always have. And I especially love proving people wrong. The more I was told I couldn't or shouldn't, the more certain I became that I would. That I needed to prove to myself that I could do it. It wasn't about having an Instagram following. It was about self-reliance, peace. And at that point, I'd already done all of the things you're supposed to do. I got married and settled down, the societal must to a fulfilling life. And it still left me feeling lost, alone, unfulfilled, like I was living someone else's version of happiness. So when people told me van life was unrealistic, I couldn't help but think, unrealistic in what context? Staying in a life that didn't fit just because it looked acceptable from the outside was something I'd already done. It didn't scratch the itch. At least this time, if I was going to fail, it would be on my own terms. So I started planning. I went all in on research. Sprinter, ProMaster, Transit. I learned the pros and cons of each. The Sprinter was out of my price range, as much as I would have loved to have one. The Transit felt too narrow, and the ProMaster was known for being unreliable mechanically. Eventually, I landed on a ProMaster. It just made the most sense for what I needed. It was in my price range, had a wide cargo space, and I liked the seats in it. Now that I had the van picked out, I went back and forth on whether I should convert it myself or hire someone. Every option came with its own learning curve and its own risks. I'm not very handy, nor have I done much woodworking. I also didn't have a ton of extra time to put into a build. After what felt like months of scrolling, searching, obsessing, I found her, a woman who built out vans. She understood what I was looking for without me needing to over-explain it. It was important to me to have a woman do the build. There was something about that choice that made the whole thing feel safer, more aligned, like I was building this life on a foundation I could actually trust. The night I sent the email, the one that confirmed I was moving forward with the van build, everything changed. I can't fully explain what happened that night yet, but I'll say this. It marked the beginning of a reality I never imagined I'd be living. That email wasn't just the start of a van build. It was the last normal thing I did before everything fell apart. Safety then became the thing I was chasing, and this podcast was born from that realization. It wasn't just about building a van anymore. It was about building a life I could survive in. That night didn't stop the dream. If anything, it sharpened it. Whatever fear I had about leaving behind a traditional life was replaced by a deeper fear, a fear of staying in my new reality. The van became a way out. And with that shift, my entire approach to the build changed. It wasn't just about storage or how it would look in a photo. I started thinking about locks, exits, how quickly I could drive away if I had to, the safe places I could park to sleep, and how I'd stay unnoticed. I looked at safety features I hadn't even known existed a few weeks earlier. I was still building a home on wheels, but now I was building protection, autonomy, a space where I could exist on my own terms. The build process was intimate and intentional. We had phone calls, video chats, long email threads. Every decision was made together. She knew what it would take to bring the van to life structurally, and I knew how I wanted to feel. Safe, spacious, grounded, mine. We designed it from the ground up. At the very back of the van, I had a larger than average bed. Comfort was still super important to me. I didn't have a dog yet, but I had hoped I would have a pup that would need to fit into the bed too. In the center, there was a couch, and that could double as a workspace or place to read. I've definitely been called bougie a time or two, so you know I couldn't leave out a shower. It was built in and beautiful. All wood finishes with a little cubby for my toiletries. And in the shower was a compostable toilet. And then the kitchen was right behind the driver's seat, complete with a counter, storage, and a mirror mounted above it. But the mirror wasn't just decorative, it was actually an escape. You could pull the mirror off of the wall to reveal a hidden crawl space, just big enough for me to slide through and access the driver's seat. That became the most important safety feature in the entire van, because with my situation, I knew I might need to leave quickly. I couldn't afford to be trapped in the back with no way out. The other major safety addition was something I'd never seen in another van build: a full camera system. One camera on each side, front, back, left, and right, all feeding live into a monitor inside. I could see any angle at any time. It gave me peace of mind because this van wasn't just for travel or aesthetics. It was a mobile sanctuary, a way to move through the world on my own terms while keeping safety at the forefront. If you're a woman considering van life or solo travel, safety isn't just a checklist. It's a mindset. It's the difference between feeling free and feeling trapped in a beautiful box on wheels. There are a few things I learned, some through research and some the hard way, that made a huge difference. These are some things you can do to feel a little bit safer. An alarm system. It can be installed in the van, just like in a house. You can put the keypad by the door and arm it when you're inside. Steady internet. Satellite is your best bet for this, as you often end up in isolated areas. If you don't want to get that, then I would consider a satellite phone or communicator. I have the Garmin InReach Mini 2, and it allows me to send text messages if I don't have cell service. It also has an emergency SOS feature. A hidden crawl space or pass-through, like the one I had behind my mirror, for emergency access to the driver's seat without having to exit the vehicle. I've also seen people make a sliding door between the front seats. Window covers or blackout curtains for privacy, but to also make it impossible for someone to tell if you're inside. A safety tool like a personal alarm, pepper spray, or GPS tracker that someone you trust can monitor. Motion sensor lights on the outside of the van to deter anyone from approaching unnoticed. Parking strategies. Stay near well-lit areas, choose lots with security cameras when possible, and always trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. A false company logo magnet on the side of the van, something like mobile plumbing and repair, to make the van look more like a work vehicle than a personal one. The issue with this is that sometimes people will single out your van to rob it. Get a dog. Getting a dog will complicate your life on the road, but I would take the companionship and safety of a dog any day. Some people feel it restricts the lifestyle and you can't take your dog everywhere with you. On a later episode, I will dive into all the pros and cons of having a dog on the road. With my personal van build, I thought I was building something to move me forward, but really I was still carrying a lot of what I hadn't fully faced. You can do everything right, build the interior, install the cameras, add the decor, and still not fully be prepared for what it feels like to be in it and alone, out there living in the thing you planned in your head for months. All of those safety features helped me feel in control, but there's a difference between feeling safe and being ready. Once the plans were finalized, it was time to deliver the van to be converted. I drove the empty van, just a hollow metal shell, 18 hours to drop it off. It was one of the hardest drives I've ever done. The back rattled like a tin can, and the sheer size of it made every turn feel like a small battle. But I did it. I stopped along the way, made little detours, took in places I never would have seen otherwise. And despite the exhaustion, I was proud. It felt like the beginning of something big. Luckily, I got to fly back home. Almost 4 months later, the van was ready. This time, I made the return trip with a brand new travel companion, my puppy. We rented a car and did the drive all over again, but the challenge of wrangling a puppy on a long road trip made the first journey look easy. Still, we made it, and when I saw the finished van, my van, I felt something click. It was exactly what I had imagined until the first night. I had booked a hip camp spot to sleep in, just someone's open field. Romantic in theory, but in reality, mosquitoes swarmed me the moment I opened the door. I brought them into the van with me. It was 80 degrees inside, and I couldn't get the AC to work. In trying to fix it, I accidentally shut down the entire electrical system. I sat there, sweating, itching, overwhelmed, thinking, what have I done? There was no cell service, no one to text, no one to call for comfort. Thankfully, I had just rekindled a friendship with one of my closest friends. The next day, I drove to her house and ended up staying longer than I planned. I let the stress catch up with me. All the big road trip plans I made, well, I didn't do any of them. I just didn't have it in me. The van was everything I thought I wanted, but when I finally was alone with it, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt much more like fear. The trauma I had gone through had my brain feeling like it was constantly bracing for impact. I was afraid of everything. I had brain fog so thick I couldn't think clearly. I had no motivation to explore, no desire to take risks. The van felt too small. The woods felt too dark. I couldn't appreciate nature for what it was. I was only thinking about what could be in the woods. I started to ask myself if I made a mistake. I tried to go back and ease into sleeping in my van since I had already tried jumping straight into it. I slept in the van in my driveway, then I planned another trip. I kept trying to prove to myself that it would work, but it never felt quite right. I was uncomfortable, anxious, and exhausted. Finding safe places to sleep was much harder than I anticipated. Eventually, after months of internal back and forth, I made the decision to sell the van. I had named her Wednesday, and to me, she wasn't just a vehicle, she was a symbol. She wasn't just something I helped build. She carried everything I thought would make me feel whole again. Every detail held a piece of my life I was trying to rebuild. She was the only home that felt truly mine after everything I had lost. So why wasn't it working? I had poured myself into this build, but in truth, no van could heal what I was carrying, and that's okay. In preparing to sell her, I had to face everything I'd been avoiding. I learned how to manage systems, fix parts, create listings, handle strangers coming to see her. I did things I never thought I could. It felt like a loss, but it was also empowering. When I finally sold her, it was to a woman ready for her next chapter. That made it easier. It ended the way I needed it to. Because Wednesday wasn't my forever home. She was a bridge, a part of my healing, not the whole of it. After I sold the van, everything got quiet. No more distractions, no more clinging to a dream I'd outgrown. I was left with myself, just me, and the reality I had been trying so hard to outrun. There was no plan, no next step. My career had been completely knocked off course. The van had given me something to focus on, something that felt like progress. Letting her go meant letting go of the future I had pictured, the one I had clung to when everything else felt uncertain. And the grief of that loss was real. It wasn't just the loss of the van, it was the loss of a version of me that if I just kept moving, maybe I wouldn't have to feel the full weight of what had happened. But once the movement stopped, I had to feel it, all of it. Sitting in that stillness, acknowledging the truth of where I was, what I'd lost, and how far I had to go was heavy. Because for the first time, I wasn't surviving through a project or a distraction. I was just surviving. And slowly, painfully, that started to shift into healing. Not because I felt ready, but because I had no choice. Van life can be a beautiful adventure, and for some people, it is. It's freedom, simplicity, or minimalism. a way to reconnect with nature or get off the grid. But it's also important to be honest about why you're drawn to it. For me, the van started as a symbol of independence, but in the end, I learned that I needed to heal before I could truly find it. Once I was alone with the van, it reflected everything I hadn't faced yet: the fear, the grief, and above all else, the need for control. If you're listening to this and dreaming about building your own tiny sanctuary on wheels, I get it. There's magic in it, but make sure you're doing it from a place of intention, not as an escape route from something that still needs your attention. I might do a future episode with tips and tricks for anyone seriously considering van life: what worked, what I'd do differently, and how to protect your peace on the road. So if that's something you're interested in, let me know. Some questions to ask yourself if you're interested in the lifestyle would be, is this sustainable as a lifestyle with your career? Do you need internet? Where would you get that? What is your budget? You'll have to think about things like paying for places to park or camp, food, water. If you do need somewhere to work, are you going to work somewhere like Starbucks where you'll have to buy coffee? And most of all, gas. What is your goal for van life? Do you seek freedom? Are you saving up for something? Or are you looking for the next place you want to live? How will you find community? How will you socialize? Life on the road can be incredibly lonely. Maybe you want to be alone, but all humans need connection. Planning. This takes way more time than I expected. Maps, stops, dump sites, it takes a ton of time. If you have pets, how will that look? Pets aren't allowed in national parks. You can take them some places, but not everywhere. How will you make sure they're cool in summer? I still travel quite a bit, even without the van, and my most recent trip ties back into everything we've been talking about in this episode. I went to New York as a last-minute escape. What started as yet another disappointment in the dating world turned into something else. A chance to treat myself, just because I could. With everything coming up, it was a small act of defiance, of reclaiming joy on my own terms before stepping into something brutal and necessary. New York is one of my favorite places to travel alone. It didn't start that way, though. I used to be overwhelmed by the city. I'd get anxious just trying to cross the street. There were times I nearly had a full-blown panic attack from the noise and the sheer intensity of it all. But now I thrive in that intensity. I love the anonymity, the movement, and the permission to take up space without explanation. I get to do whatever I want, see the shows I want, eat what I want, make my own schedule. The first show I saw on this trip was 6. It's been on my list for forever, but somehow something else always comes up first. This time, the timing was perfect. I love when the universe hands you little moments like that. If you're not familiar, 6 is about the 6 wives of Henry VIII. Each queen tells her story, her trauma, her pain, her survival, and they basically compete over who had it the worst. I was talking to a friend recently about how people process trauma so differently. What wrecks one person might barely register for someone else. There's no universal scale, but still we compare. Who had it worse? Who deserves the most empathy? Whose pain counts the most? 6 leans right into that. There's even a line about trauma and abuse, about whose is bigger. By the end, the queens stop competing. They come together and they take back their power. They stop being defined by a man they married and they crown themselves instead. That felt like a full circle moment for me, because that's what this entire season of my life has been about. No longer letting someone else's choices or abuse define me. No longer measuring my worth by what I endured. I'm not the aftermath of someone else's story. I'm the author of my own. And coming together with other women who have experienced the same has been the highlight. That evening, I saw Maybe Happy Ending. Without giving too much away, it's about 2 robots who fall in love and what that even means. It explores the complexities of connection and how love isn't always clean or logical. It asks a question I haven't been able to stop thinking about. If you had the choice, would you still choose love, even knowing how much it might hurt? Love is beautiful, but it's also brutal. It lifts you up, and sometimes it breaks you wide open. Even after everything I've been through, there's still a part of me that would say yes. Not because I want the pain, but because I've learned that loving deeply, even when it doesn't last, teaches you something about who you are, what you need, and what you deserve. I switched it up and saw the new Stranger Things show on my second day there. It was the first real horror show I've seen, though I love seeing Evil Dead and getting splattered with blood. If you're a fan of the Netflix series, it's definitely worth it for the special effects alone. No grand love story in this one, though. Just monsters, drama, and some seriously impressive special effects. I ended the night with none other than Moulin Rouge. It's become kind of a tradition for me now. I don't think I've taken a trip to New York without seeing it at least once. Apologies to my friends I've lovingly dragged along for the ride. This time I got to see Jordan Fisher as Christian, and he nailed it. He gave the role so much heart and depth. It was like watching it for the first time all over again. Watching Moulin Rouge now, after everything that's happened, it hits different. The passion, the pain, the idea that the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. I believed that with my whole heart. I lived by it. And of course, tattooed it on my skin. While I was sitting in the theater, I felt something deeper, something a little heavier, because I've lived that kind of love that asks too much. I've given until I had nothing left, and I've stayed when I should have left. I sacrificed pieces of myself in the name of loyalty, hope, and some imagined ending where it all finally made sense. And now, when I watch Moulin Rouge, I still feel the magic, but I also feel the ache. I see the way love and tragedy are intertwined in that story, and I realize how much of my own belief system was shaped by that narrative, that love has to hurt to be real, that sacrifice makes it meaningful, that if it breaks you, it must be worth something. Now I know better. Love can be beautiful. It can even be intense, but it shouldn't be the thing that destroys you. I still carry that quote with me, but now I hold it differently. Love is still the greatest thing, but the way I love myself has to come first. My last day in New York wasn't exactly magical. It started with a weird massage in Chinatown, a few missed subway trains, and spiraled into the worst travel experience I've ever had. I got to the airport an hour and a half early, only to find out my flight was delayed. No big deal at first. They boarded us about 40 minutes late. We got on the plane, and instantly it was sweltering. No air coming from the vents. Everyone was using the in-flight menus as makeshift fans. It had to be 90 degrees. After about 30 minutes of that, the pilot came over the intercom to tell us that the AC was out. Big surprise. They were working on it, but we might have to deplane. The woman next to me told me that it was her 81st birthday and also her 60th wedding anniversary. She also told me that she has an autoimmune disease that made it hard for her to tolerate extreme heat. Somehow, she was still positive and laughing. After that conversation, there was a call for medical help. A flight attendant asked over the intercom if there were any professionals on board. A woman in the row in front of me immediately raised her hand and ran to the front. It was heroic. A few minutes later, we were told to get off the plane. She actually said, "Get off now." A woman had a seizure from the heat. She was in a wheelchair as we got off the plane. Everyone was glistening with sweat, shirts soaked through. It was ridiculous. They told us we'd be getting a new plane in an hour or two. We couldn't believe it. I was sweaty, tired, and needed a drink. There was only one seat open at the bar near the gate, and I snagged it. The woman next to me eventually asked if I was on the same flight as her. We started talking about work, life, the usual. Eventually, I told her about the podcast. I felt safe enough to share my story, and she shared hers too. That's something I've learned. Almost every woman I meet has some story of abuse or trauma, something that should have never happened to her, and yet here we are. We went to check on our flight, delayed again at a different gate. We talked to the other passengers and learned that 2 other planes had the same exact AC issue. Then we were delayed until 1 a.m. While we waited, a group of band students who were also stuck decided to get out their instruments and have a little practice. It was terrible. Off key, off beat, and none of us were having it. Then they started marching through the terminal playing When the Saints Go Marching In on a loop, with a woman in a bright skirt leading the way, waving an umbrella like we were all in some sort of fever dream. After that, we finally boarded at 12:30 a.m. The flight attendant told us we had to hurry. LaGuardia has a strict curfew, and if we didn't take off fast, we weren't going anywhere. I've never seen people board that quickly. We were on, seated, and hopeful. After 20 minutes, silence. Then an announcement came. There was a storm, and in trying to reroute, the crew had passed their duty time. We had to get off the plane again. We couldn't deplane right away because of another broken plane that was stuck at our gate. 2 hours later, our flight was canceled. This is one of my actual nightmares, being stranded, unable to get home. I found my new friend waiting to talk to the gate agent, and I jumped in line with her. They created a flight for us the next morning. Now we had to figure out where to sleep. They offered to reimburse hotel costs, but every hotel nearby was booked. Somehow, my friend managed to grab the last suite at a hotel about 10 minutes away. It was in Chinatown, and it was $500. It wasn't the worst, but it wasn't what I thought a $500 suite would be like. We got a good laugh out of it, though. We headed back to the airport 4 hours after we'd left. We'd been there for 13 hours, minus our short nap break. This time, thankfully, we actually took off. I didn't let myself exhale until the wheels hit the runway in Nashville. When I finally walked through the door and saw my pups waiting for me, I could have cried. I think I did a little. That whole experience honestly traumatized me. I don't want to fly again for a long time. I later read an article that said that over 600 flights were delayed or canceled because of the weather. It was a domino effect. Even with all of that, the delays, being drenched in sweat, and even the cursed marching band moment, making friends with an amazing woman was worth it. Women are amazing. The way we show up for each other, even as strangers, is something I'll never stop being in awe of. Before I end the episode, I want to share something I haven't blatantly stated yet, and the reason I started this podcast in the first place. I'm at the tail end of a legal process that's finally headed to trial. Preparing for that, well, it's going to take a lot more than paperwork and legal meetings. The emotional toll from reading back through all of the text messages, looking through the photos, videos, it's all going to be emotionally brutal. So, while I'll be here, I'll be focusing on protecting my peace when I can. That might mean a last-minute trip into the woods with no service, or simply not answering calls or texts for a few days, which means that I won't have the extra energy to give my next episodes the effort they deserve. But when it's over, and I mean finally over, I'll be ready to tell my story. I promise you won't want to miss it. Until then, stay familiar.